you have no idea how happy I am that I finally gotten the chance to sit down and talk about this. As you can see from the title of the video, this is going to be kind of an overview of what gaming has become up until this point in the last, and I'm really going to be looking at 2010 to 2016, but gaming in 2016, it's fair to say it's much different than what it was back in 2010. I would even argue maybe more so than gaming between 2005 and 2010. I think gaming has changed a lot more within this 5-year period than within the 5-year period of 2005 and 2010. And here's why. So I want us to all kind of jump into a time machine for a second and go back into 2010. Let's just imagine, forget about all the games right now that are out, right? Forget about the Division. I want you to forget about everything, right? Everything that's been coming out here. Everything is coming out. Dark Souls 3. These games, what is Dark Souls 3? Nobody's heard about this, right? We're going back into 2010. Jump into time machine. So we come out, and what do we see? We ask the average, we find a gamer out there on the street, and we ask him, your average PC gamer, right? We're not talking about consoles here, really. I'm going to focus this video more on PC gaming. But if you ask your average PC gamer, what's big right now? What are people playing? And I think in most cases, you'd really be hearing people talking about MMOs still. And they're going to be saying, oh, well, MMOs, I'm playing World of Warcraft now. That's Wrath of the Lich King. It's great. I'm doing Iceground raiding. And they'll be talking about other MMOs. Maybe if it's not World of Warcraft, it'll be something else. A lot of free-to-play games. They might be arguing about why free-to-play games are pay-to-win, because that was still a thing back then. It's not that much of a thing now if you really think about it. When was the last time you heard, is this game pay-to-win? You don't really hear that. For good reason. We'll get into that. But people would really be talking about online games, and we'd still be in this phase of the phenomena of online games. And this phase had been going on since 2004, really. I want to say the release of World of Warcraft was what made, in the West especially, online games, MMOs, big. And that process continued up until 2010. If you really think about it, yes, there were so many other games that came out. I don't want to put down any of those games. I don't want you to think that those games made no difference or made no impact on how gaming is now, but online games especially were so hugely influential, and they continue their effects that are still being felt nowadays. So but in between that 2005-2010 period, that was the big phenomenon. That was what people have been focused on. And we'll get into the video later on and talk about 2010-2016. We've already kind of started, but now there's been multiple phenomena. There's probably one that's maybe on the horizon now. We don't know, really. But that's why I say 2010, 2016, even more dynamic, even more change than 2005, 2010. So going back, 2010, we asked people everything there. And let's imagine that, a couple months progress, from the beginning of 2010, we get into June. And that's really when this little game kind of came out. I believe that was still in the alpha. The alpha came out called Minecraft. And nowadays, everybody knows about Minecraft, but back then, Minecraft slowly but surely blew up. It started off as an alpha that a few people tried out, and then as the alpha progressed, as it was not just a game that you go in the browser and put a bunch of blocks, you could actually play it and do things like survival and build a house and everything. And then obviously later on, you could buy the game. I think initially, I might get the order here wrong. I do believe that the game was initially just free to play. You go into the browser and you can just stack a couple of blocks. But later on, Notch was able to put up the game. Notch is the creator, in case you guys don't know. But he would put the game up so people can buy it and play it. And this game really blew up. And it was the first sort of sandbox voxel game that had such huge of a success within the years to come. Especially by 2011, this game was now huge. Everybody was talking about it, whether it was on news, online, articles, everywhere. People were talking about Minecraft and how this small indie game had blown up and become huge. And at that point, why was this a turning point, I think, in gaming? Well, because up until then, you had the AAA games. You had, these big studios that were making games all the time. You had free-to-play games, which at that point, a lot of them were MMOs, honestly. and everybody was talking, except for browser games, I guess you can call those as well, free-to-play games as well. But for the big part, the big free-to-play games, those were the ones that people were talking, oh, this is a WoW clone, this is a WoW clone. Nobody ever says this nowadays, but people were saying, oh, this is a WoW clone, this is like, it's never going to be successful, nothing is going to kill WoW. But those, other than those types of games, indie games had existed, but they weren't something that huge. What an indie game back then would have been was really what I guess some browser games would be, where someone would make some sort of thing that's pretty small. They'd put it up on their website, and people would be able to go there and play it. I'm not sure when Dwarf Fortress came out, but think of something along those lines, something that you can just go in, download, or play on their website. And it was like something small. But Minecraft changed it because it made indie games this thing that can be monetized now, and it was something that it kind of grew into the culture. People would now say, okay, I want to buy this new indie game, and there were so many that came out in the next years, and it's still going on. But moving on to 2000 and late 2010, 2011 was when another game started gaining popularity and once again shifted sort of direction of gaming, was League of Legends. I'm not sure the exact date when League of Legends was first released to be played in closed beta, or they didn't have an alpha. I'm pretty sure it was closed beta first, but it was around that time period, 2010, I want to say. So at that point, everybody was still playing, I guess, Warcraft 3, Dota, if they wanted to play something. That genre of game, that was really the only MOBA. That was the original MOBA, technically. The term MOBA, by the way, the term MOBA did not exist until there were more games of this, what became a genre. Because everybody just called it Dota. I'm playing Dota. There was a StarCraft, which was the original kind of Dota, where it kind of started off from. But Warcraft 3 was where it blew up and became competitive, and that's when tournaments became huge and people played it. Similarly, how games like CS and StarCraft. So, why this game blew up was because it was kind of reinventing the formula of Dota 2. Dota 2 does not exist. We don't know about what Dota 2 is yet. This game, we don't want to go back in the past and change the past by telling people about Dota 2. No. Dota 2 does not exist. At this point, it's just Dota. And League of Legends changed up the formula because it made basically Dota accessible to your average gamer that's not so familiar with the genre. Maybe they're too young. Maybe they've never tried this type of game yet. Maybe they didn't want to bother with downloading map packs and installing the mod. Nothing like that. You just downloaded the launcher and you played the game, and it was free to play. Awesome, right? So at that point, other than CS, mainly StarCraft. StarCraft was kind of the big competitive game. But other than that, there wasn't really something that, in that time period, 2010, 2011, was that dominant in the esports scene, really. You still obviously had Call of Duties. I don't want to talk about a lot of the other console games, which is where there's always been competitive gaming. But in terms of PC gaming, StarCraft was really the big thing. And I guess you could say CS, though obviously not as big as it is now with CSGO. So, all of a sudden, League of Legends started blowing up, and people even started doing this thing called live streaming on Justin TV at the time. There was no Twitch. People started doing live streams for League of Legends, and then Heroes of Newerth also. That's another MOBA game that came out. And this genre slowly but surely, I don't even say slowly, I think slowly is an understatement. It pretty quickly, within a year or two, became huge. And all of a sudden it moved away, the sort of the competitive scenes kind of moved away from StarCraft. And they went into games like League of Legends and Heroes of Newerth. And later on, late 2012 or 2013, again, my dates are not in this video. Don't rely too much on my dates, but I want to say roughly within that time period is when Dota 2 started going out to people to be playable. And all of a sudden, MOBA games became huge, and they changed how gaming is from that point onward. And why? That's not really at all an overstatement. They really have changed it. Let's think about it right now. Go back to 2016. So right now it's April almost, and we're about to in about a month or two, a big game is going to come out called Overwatch. And now you're wondering, Krion, what the hell are you talking about? Overwatch? What? It's not a MOBA. Well, think about it a little bit. A lot of the elements, other than Overwatch, there's games like Paladins, Paragon, I'm forgetting, Battleborn, yeah. And many other games, I can't remember all their names, but these are kind of some of the big ones. That are all games that, even if they haven't taken the basic concept, the basic concept of having, leveling throughout your play session, your match, and getting items and everything like that, and having minions necessarily, they didn't take that, but they took a lot of the other elements from MOBA, such as, the main one, really, is having heroes. For all of a sudden, from having your own customizable characters, or having these preset characters like in TF2, you had these characters now that have very rich personalities. They all have their unique weapons. Some of them have, instead of weapons, they have abilities. They don't have like a gun or a mace or a sword that they use. They use like, let's say, psychic powers or some stuff like that, right? So they all are based now around these abilities that they use, and in order to play that class, there are no classes really. The character is the class. And this is something that definitely is very, very MOBA-ish, if you think about it. Overwatch kind of takes a lot of the elements of Team Fortress in the sense of the game modes, the maps, the fact that it's a first-person shooter, obviously. But it also takes a lot of elements from MOBA games. And it's not the only one to do this. Even a game like Battleborn, which is very PvE as well oriented, because in Battleborn you even have a solo co-op going up. It's a co-op campaign and a story mode. You also have even more MOBA elements, such as minions, and kind of even there's like a game mode where you can go and feed in your minions into this like junk compilers or something like that, right? Which is again like very, very MOBA-ish elements. So before that, in the years before that, you can now, if you go online and you browse MOBA and you look at some of the MOBA games that are out there, I'm sure a lot of you haven't even heard of them, but there's so many. There's so many games, and so many of them are called League of Legends clones, Dota clones, because both games are so big, unlike with World of Warcraft back in the day. Now, these are two games that, yeah, League of Legends is bigger, but Dota is still very big. There's always been this ongoing argument about which one is better and which one is worse. But regardless, people always see them as kind of the originals at this point. So that's, one thing that's huge now. If we look at it, we have the influence from MMOs. It's carried on to the 2010s and beyond, where most games now have a lot of online features. They have a lot of social features. A lot of them, similarly, this is another thing, again, that RPGs and online games have introduced. Back in the day when you were playing a shooter, or you're playing really any game that wasn't an RPG, you didn't have like progression really. You didn't have like leveling system or specs. Nowadays you do. Like think about for example, the original Crysis, right? Crysis didn't have like genetic trees or specialization trees. But later on, as you look into the different Crysis that come beyond that, you have all these loadouts that you can have. You can go and play more of a stealthy playstyle. You can play more of a tanky playstyle or more offensive playstyle. And now all kinds of games have these elements. Look at a game like The Division. There's so many MMO elements in a game like that. Look at a game like Warframe. I'll get into Warframe and talk about that a little bit later on in the video. But you have all these games now that have so many of these features that originally RPG games had, and now they're spread out. And the RPG genre has diluted and become one with every other genre. Similarly with MOBA games, is kind of one of the main things that was, my main point is this. In the same way MOBA games have diluted and become part of a lot of other genres. And now going into the next point, right? What's the next big influential thing that has happened in the last 5 years? Again, this time period that we're looking at in this video, that has influenced gaming in 2016, continues to influence it. Well, some of you know it as Kickstarter, others know it as Early Access on Steam. But regardless of how what you call it, it's basically the act of supporting a game that can usually be they were kind of originally indie projects, whether it was a hardware project even. we're focusing obviously on games here, but Kickstarter was also for hardware. So there were all these things that were originally indie, but nowadays we see so many bigger companies that allow you to do this. Even if you look at it, pre-purchasing and founder packs are basically very much like what early access is. You're investing in a product before you actually get the full product, or you even get to play the product. And most of the time, all of these Kickstarter, it kind of started with Kickstarter and other websites of that type. But when you pre-purchase something, or you invest in it, you get these additional bonuses like being able to help to develop the game, and you're able to get these unique skins and limited time items and founder stuff. I'm not trying to be too cynical here. I know it sounds like it, but these are all very common things that kind of are kind of a staple in any sort of early access and founder pack program. So this thing became really huge in the last 2-3 years, and started off with indie games, but then we got into bigger studios doing this. If you look at even Sony Online Entertainment did that with H1Z1. Same thing. I know now Sony Online Entertainment is Daybreak, and they're much smaller and everything, but they did that, and they're not the only company to do that. We'll get into that a little bit later. I want to talk about this. That's going to be my final point, actually. Talking about this one really interesting thing that has all of this builds into. All of it. Everything. It sounds so weird, but everything. All these elements, both the business, the art, the technical elements, everything kind of builds up from MOBAs, free-to-play games, MMOs, early access. All of this stuff builds up into this really cool point that I want to make at the end of the video, and I hope you guys like it at the end, but I want to save it. So, going back to early access, that's a big thing, and it's changed gaming culture so much, because if you look at it now, a lot of the time you never get a full game. You buy a game and you wait for the game to develop, and a lot of times they don't come out early access, and that's mainly also to blame. It's becoming kind of part of everything. Less so with a lot of the smaller indie projects, like games like Darkest Dungeon, or these games that usually eventually come out. Even if it's a year or 2 years, they usually come out and they're finished games that later on maybe can have expansions even. But those are usually like the single player sort of indie games, not so much survival horror games, which is kind of where you blame. you kind of have to put the blame on them. Survival horror games are what really ruined early access, continue to ruin it. And sadly now a lot of companies are seeing this almost as this normal thing. Even gamers are seeing it as a normal thing. Back in the day, if you think about it, investing in a game that you don't get, it's crazy. It's absurd. Nobody would really fall for that. But nowadays it really works. People, developers can do that, whether knowingly or whether intentionally. They kind of just don't care. Might look like that sometimes, but a lot of the time it's just that they don't expect the game to. You can't expect success. Success is not something you expect. You don't know if your game is going to be good. You hope that people are interested in your game and they invest in your game, but you never know if it's going to be something that becomes big, or whether you can even finish it because you might not have enough funding. So I completely understand where developers are coming in from that side, but at the same time, if you look at gamers, people have invested in so many games now that, and I'm obviously, my case is a little bit different. This is a point where it's a little hard for me to relate to your average PC gamer, but a lot of people that I've talked with, whether it's over Twitch or YouTube, or seen even a lot of other, content creators, they always, try these different types of games. They always invest in them. They always talk about them. And you can always sense after some time this feeling of disappointment that all of them carry. People make jokes about it now. If you go into Twitch chat, and you talk about early access games, people usually have this sort of notion that you get into early access and it almost feels like a scam. You're never going to get the full game. It's always going to be this crappy alpha, buggy, and it's going to be this horror survival game that you get bored of after the first week of its launch. It happened with so many games. It happened with The Forest. It's happened... Rust has a strong population, but I still want to put DayZ and Rust in that category. I realize the case with The Forest is much worse. There's so many other games. Honestly, I've forgotten most of their names. Like, there was one game that came out that was about these aliens. It was basically like The Forest. They put you on some other planet, and you had to survive and build stuff. It was like literally just this forest. It was built on the Unity engine. That's another thing. A lot of these early access survival horror games are all built on the Unity engine. For worse, I think. I don't want to say for better or for worse. Here, it's really for worse because most of them end up looking almost exactly the same and even functioning exactly the same. The Stomping Grounds, another game that, that wasn't really a Unity engine. That was actually, I think, Unreal Engine 4 or something like that. Pretty sure it was the Unreal Engine, the new one. But there's so many games that have changed how people's expectations have developed for their games and what their game is actually going to be like. People become more patient to some extent. Obviously, patience dries out pretty quick as well. But people have become much different now than they were back in 2009, 2008, where you buy a game, you play the game, you usually expect to get some expansions afterwards, in best case, but it's a finished game. Nowadays, with pre-purchasing and all these benefits that you get, the gaming culture has really changed in that sense. I want to talk about this in another video here. I don't want to leave it on a cliffhanger, but I do think the whole point about investment and what is worth investing your money, but even more importantly, because nothing can, you can't buy time. You can't get more time. So that's why I think investing your time, more importantly. What is worth investing your time in? What is worth investing your time, your attention, your hard-earned money as well? That's something that I want to talk about in a whole different separate video. I think that's going to be actually probably the next video that I do about this if people especially are interested. Early access, for good or for bad, a lot of good things have come out of it. Again, Darkest Dungeon is a great game. There's so many other games that are like that, but there's also a lot of bad games that have ruined sort of the image of what early access could be, or what Kickstarter could be. And moving on to now, actually the final point, we're going into the 22nd minute of this video. I've been talking about this for 22 minutes, but what does all of this build into? So if we look at free-to-play games, right? Going back to 2010 again, we look at originally free-to-play games, MMOs, right? Then we look at the sort of sandboxy, voxel-based games, especially indie games as well. Then looking at MOBAs and the influence that MOBAs have had by creating this sort of competitive scene for people, creating a lot more, especially it's almost like this subculture, the competitive subculture, through especially Twitch. Twitch is really the big place where you look at all these games, whether it's Hearthstone, whether it's League of Legends, Dota, Smite, any of these games, CS obviously I don't want to put it into that category, but it's a competitive game. So they create this sort of culture that people want to play nowadays more, a 20-minute, 40-minute match maybe, invest in that time, play against other players, and then finish their game, get off and do something else, or play some other co-op game. Usually that's again shorter, as opposed to MMOs, where before you'd queue for arenas, you go in, you wait for hours to find a huge clan to fight outside in front of a castle. I'm talking about Lineage 2 here, but a lot of MMOs, you'd wait for hours to get these big groups of players organized to be able to fight and stuff. So in that sense, that's what MOBA games have really influenced. It's created everything more into these sort of smaller lobbies, matches that are shorter, more concise, and it really has made players almost gamers a little bit more impatient even. And then building up to early access, which has influenced more so, not so much culture in like the sense of like things like patience and stuff like that as MOBAs have, but more of expectations and financial management, how people actually manage their money when they're invested into different games. So we already talked about that, but having them all of them kind of set out like this, laid out, I want to talk about the final point, which is, other than the fact that we now have free-to-play games and AAA games, all of which take advantage or use the influences of the key points of this video, we also have these types of games that have come out, which are from studios and developers that are usually somewhere in between indie and AAA. I think some of you that maybe get a sense already of what I'm going to talk about understand that this is something that I think moving forward we're going to be seeing a lot more of. So specifically, I'm talking about games like Warframe, games like Path of Exile, games like PlanetSide, Killing Floor. I mean, there's so many other games like this now. There are not that many companies again, but there is a good amount of games that are of that type. So this genre has, well, it's not really a genre, but it's really these types of developers, these types of studios are usually much closer in touch with their communities. Similar to how indie developers are, and they use Twitter and stuff like that. But more so, even in the case of Warframe, I'll give you a specific example. Developer live streams every 2 weeks where they talk about the new content. They talk about what they're going to be adding on in the next update, and staying really in touch. And you almost get the sense of you actually know the developers, right? You actually get to see the developers. They're on the live stream. They almost become like these celebrities. People joke about them. They talk with them on Twitter. They engage, and they laugh and they make jokes. And sometimes people get frustrated at them that something goes wrong with an update or something like that. And it's really this mid ground between having the budget, and not really the budget quite as a budget as big as a AAA game, but having a bigger development team, having more obviously financial resources, not quite much as the advertising as a lot of AAA games have. A game like Warframe doesn't have TV commercials like a game like The Division would have, right? It wouldn't be having like these commercials that will be coming out for months before the game comes out and be hyping it up. But similar to an indie game, they're very in touch with their community. And here's the other thing that's I don't know what to attribute this really to, because it's become part of both AAA games with how they have pre-purchases now, and part of indie games with early access. But similarly, these types of companies now have these things called founder packs. What a founder pack is usually you buy the thing and you can play the closed beta. You buy this $30, $40, sometimes it can be up. It has a couple of tiers, so you can buy like a $100 even thing, and it gives you special skins, like a XP boost and character slots. There's so many different things that you can usually get. And usually, like with a game like Warframe, again, and Path of Exile, they kind of released this very, very bare-bone version of the game originally, and if people liked it, they could invest in it. They can become founders. They get this sort of special status in the forums and have more of a say in the development of the game. And then they, then if the game gets enough support, and if the developers know what they're doing, obviously here it also depends a lot on the developers, not just on how much money they get, because getting money and knowing how to use money are two different things. But they end up making what could potentially be their first step to a successful game. And with the years to come, they stay in touch. They stay in close touch with their community, have these constant updates, similar to how MMOs had, expansions, these usually bigger updates that change the game quite a bit. And then, if you really think about it, and if you really look at it, these types of companies use a little bit of all of these elements. Obviously, Warframe is more of a PvE game, so I can't use a lot of the MOBA elements. Though, if you really think about it, every Warframe is a specific character. There's male and female Warframes. They have different shapes, colors, abilities, right? They use different abilities. You can use 4 abilities in every Warframe. And they're all unique, similarly to how characters from a MOBA game are. This does not go for every single one of these types of companies. I don't know what to call them, by the way. I don't know what to call them. Hybrid companies, because they're not indie. They're not quite, the size of a AAA. I guess you could call them maybe in certain cases AAA. I don't know what officially they would be called, but they definitely don't feel like something that, like Electronic Arts. They definitely don't feel like a company like that in the way their attitude towards their audience. So it's fascinating, really. Like, if you look these 5 years, all of these elements slowly build up and they get encompassed into every consecutive thing that comes out in the years to come. Right? It sounds a little convoluted, but basically think of it like a wave almost. Every single wave, as it crashes down, it flows into the next wave, and it kind of becomes part of it. So it's really exciting. I know this video, you might have expected to talk about a little bit more about the negatives as well. I think that's, again, as I said previously, there's things to talk about early access and other things about what is worth investing time and money in. I think that's deserving of a separate video. Hopefully the next video, if you guys are interested, I'll talk about that. But it's fascinating, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, how much gaming has changed. And I really think right now, first quarter of 2016, we've seen sort of what's come out in the last couple of years, and it's a good point to just stop and think about it. I'm glad that I was able to sit down and talk to you for 30 minutes about this. I hope that those of you that have actually stuck around till the end, thank you. Again, thank you to everybody, regardless of whether you're here for a minute or for 30 minutes. Thank you for listening to this. And I don't expect that I really have enlightened anybody with anything, or if I've told you anything all that different or unique, or shown you this like different perspective or anything like that. I don't think that was the point of the video. It's more of an overlook and just me sharing my opinion of some of the things that really fascinate me through both a business standpoint, artistic standpoint, and like design choices of how games are made, how games are marketed. Everything is influenced. Everything. And that's what's so great about gaming. That gaming it's an industry, it's an art form, it's a social place. It's so many things that a lot of other media don't quite. I mean, they do it, and obviously every form of medium evolves. Even movies, TV shows, things like that. But it's fascinating with gaming, especially because it changes so quickly, and it's even more closely interrelated with the internet, more so than movies and television, even though they're trying to encompass social media features a lot more, as you can see nowadays with TV shows and, even how movies market themselves. Think about superhero movies. How much do they use, their actors to actually promote their movies through Facebook and Twitter and things like that. Again, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I don't even know how to close down this video, but it really is interesting, and I hope to stick around with gaming to years to come. It's been an important part of my life. I'm sure with a lot of you as well, especially those of you that were interested enough to watch the whole video and actually hear my opinion about this. But yeah, thank you guys. As I said, next time I talk about next video that I do of this type. I don't know really what to call these types of videos. I guess rants. But I'd really like to talk about some of the issues with investments, both in time and money, in terms of gaming, and how. I guess I'll talk a little bit more about the negatives in the next video. I'll talk about things like game servers shutting down, because that's been a big thing that's been a lot lately. It's been a big topic of discussion lately, both on YouTube, and people just talk about it. A lot of content creators have been doing videos about this, and I think it's worth me sharing my kind of opinion about it as well. Things like games not retaining the hype and popularity, again, because everything is moving so quick. Attention spans are so much shorter than they were before. So again, that's a big topic of concern when it comes to what is worth investing your time and money in. And also things like, money. In terms of money is a huge part of this. How can you drag your friends into playing something that is not going to retain the hype for as long as it is, especially if it's a $60 full price AAA game. So yeah, I'll talk about those things hopefully in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Once again, thank you. Krion, out.